They said she had everything: fame, fortune, beauty, and influence. She walked red carpets in diamonds, graced magazine covers with her mystery, and captured hearts with her fearless presence. But the world didn't know the whole story. Beneath the flash of cameras, beyond the sound of applause, there lived a quiet ache, a search, a question echoing in the silence of her success. Is this all there is? And then something shifted, not in the headlines, not in the tabloids, but in her soul. The woman the world thought they knew took a turn that no one expected. She stepped away from the noise. She turned inward, and she found something that shook her to the core, something ancient, something sacred, something that had been waiting for her all along. She found Islam not as a religion, not as a culture, but as a calling, as a truth that filled the hollow spaces she never spoke of, as peace in a world that had always demanded performance. And oh, did the world react. The whispers came first, then the opinions, then the storm. Why would she choose this, they asked. Why cover what made her famous? Why trade red carpets for prayer rugs? Why surrender glamour for submission? But what they didn't understand is this: she wasn't losing herself. She was finally meeting herself. She wasn't hiding, she was unveiling. She wasn't breaking down, she was breaking through. They couldn't see what she saw in the early morning light of prayer, in the discipline of fasting, in the sacred pause between this world and the next. They didn't hear what she heard in the rhythm of recitation, in the language of mercy, in the quiet humility of bowing. They didn't feel the safety she found in modesty or the dignity she discovered in devotion. But she felt it, and she knew. She knew the world might walk away. She knew the price of her truth. But she also knew that this peace, this real, anchoring, breath-giving peace, was not for sale. And when a soul touches truth, there's no going back. She began to walk differently, not in fear, but in strength, not to be seen, but to see. And with every step, she stepped deeper into the woman she was always meant to be. Softer, stronger, quieter, wiser. Her voice changed, her message shifted, her work became more human, more heartfelt, more just, because when you truly find God, you can't help but serve His creation. And though the world labeled her shocking, she smiled, not out of rebellion, but out of release. Out of gratitude for a clarity she never imagined possible. For the first time in her life, she wasn't performing, she was praying. She wasn't acting, she was aligning. She wasn't trying to be someone else. She was returning to who she had always been, under the layers of expectation. And that is the real shock. Not that someone changed, but that someone with everything dared to walk away from it all for something deeper, truer, eternal. You see, this isn't just about a celebrity. This is about courage. This is about listening to the voice inside you when the world tries to drown it out. This is about the sacred right to begin again, to choose your own path, to find light even when everyone else is looking the other way. So let them be shocked, because sometimes the most shocking thing a person can do is choose peace. The breaking of old labels, they had always put her in boxes. Movie star, rebel, humanitarian, femme fatale. Every title, every headline, every interview tried to define her, to explain her to a world that wanted to consume her brilliance without understanding the soul behind it. From her youth, she had been marked by expectations. Some she met, some she shattered, but none of them ever truly captured who she was. They saw her as a symbol, not as a seeker. And when she made the choice that would redefine her spirit and her identity, the world didn't know what to do with her anymore. It wasn't just that she embraced a new faith. It was that she tore away the veil of labels that had been wrapped around her for decades. The woman they thought they knew made a choice rooted in conviction, in clarity, in purpose. And suddenly, none of the old categories applied. The image of her they had built, painted, and praised began to dissolve. The world struggled to reconcile the woman they had admired on screens and stages with the woman who now bowed in prayer. And in that dissonance, in that confusion, the truth was revealed. They had never really seen her. They had only seen the version they were comfortable with. But she had grown tired of being everyone else's projection. She no longer needed to be adored, applauded, or accepted. She needed to be authentic. Her decision to walk the path of Malabet Islam wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of reclamation. She wasn't throwing her past away. She was reclaiming her soul from the hands of others. She was saying, you don't get to tell my story anymore. I will tell it myself on my terms. And with that choice, the labels began to fall one by one. She wasn't here to be what the world wanted. She was here to be what she was created for. And in doing so, she gave others the courage to do the same. People who had long hidden behind fear, behind doubt, behind cultural judgment, looked at her and saw possibility, not because she was perfect, but because she was honest, because she was brave enough to change in full view of a world that resists transformation. The truth is, it takes courage to change when you're under the spotlight. It takes strength to say, I'm more than what you've called me, and it takes grace to walk through the fire of judgment without losing the softness of faith. She did all of that, not to be praised, not to prove anything, but because something deeper inside her had awakened. And once awakened, the soul cannot go back to sleep. This wasn't about rejecting who she was. It was about rising into who she was always meant to be, not a symbol, not a spectacle, but a woman of substance, clarity, and truth. And in breaking the old labels, she became limitless, not because the world said so, but because she finally believed it herself. The beauty in surrender. There is a kind of strength that doesn't roar, it doesn't perform, it doesn't push, it simply lets go. And in that release, it finds something extraordinary. Peace. For her, the journey toward Islam was not marked by grand declarations or dramatic conversions. It was quiet, it was personal, it was sacred, and above all, it was a surrender. Not a loss of control, but a return to alignment. A return to something deeper than identity, deeper than achievement, deeper than the applause of the world. She wasn't giving up. She was finally giving in to the truth her heart had known for a long time but had never been given permission to embrace. Surrender, in the way the world understands it, looks like weakness, like passivity. But in truth, real surrender requires more courage than control ever will. It requires the ego to be silent, the pride to soften, and the heart to speak. It takes everything to kneel when the world is taught you to stand tall at any cost. It takes everything to say, I don't know all the answers in a world that demands certainty. And it takes everything to trust the unseen, to believe in the sacred, to bow in submission, not because you are defeated, but because you are finally found. She had tasted everything the world said would satisfy: fame, fortune, admiration, but none of it ever quieted the ache. None of it made her feel whole. It wasn't until she surrendered to something higher than herself that she finally felt grounded. Prayer wasn't performance, it was presence. Modesty wasn't restriction, it was protection. And surrender wasn't a cage, it was the key. Every time she bowed in prayer, she was rising in purpose. Every time she let go of who she thought she had to be, she discovered who she truly was. The beauty of surrender is not in what you lose, It's in what you make room for: peace, clarity, mercy, direction. These are the gifts waiting on the other side of letting go. And she began to live differently, to speak differently, to love differently, not because she was trying to be someone else, but because she had finally stopped pretending. She had allowed herself to be led. She had stopped fighting the current and let it carry her home. There's something breathtaking about a woman who knows where her strength really comes from, not from applause, not from status, but from divine connection, from stillness, from sacred submission. And in that surrender, she became more powerful than she had ever been, because she no longer needed to be in control. She trusted the one who was. The world saw what they didn't see was the peace. The unshakable, radiant, grounded peace that lives in someone who no longer needs to hustle for worth or chase after meaning. She had found it, not in doing more, but in being more. And in surrendering to something greater, she became greater, not in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of the one who made her. And that, above all, is the most beautiful victory. Facing the backlash with grace. When she chose a new path, the world didn't respond with silence. It responded with noise. Loud, judgmental, relentless. Headlines questioned her, commentators speculated, critics attacked. They couldn't comprehend why someone with so much influence, status, and admiration would to make a choice so profoundly personal, yet so publicly misunderstood. People who once praised her now turned their backs. The world that once applauded her freedom now questioned her autonomy. And through it all, she did not shout back, she did not justify, she did not bend. She faced the backlash with grace. There's a rare kind of strength in quiet resistance. It doesn't explode, it doesn't seek revenge, it simply stands. She stood with poise, not because it was easy, but because her peace was no longer up for negotiation. She understood something the world didn't. When you find, if you don't need validation, she knew the difference between noise and purpose, between popularity and peace. And in choosing to walk with dignity instead of defensiveness, she revealed a strength that could not be shaken. The world tried to paint her decision as rebellion, as crisis, as confusion. But what they didn't see was the clarity behind her eyes, the calm that only comes from a soul anchored in something unshakable. She didn't waste energy trying to convince the world of her worth. She didn't react to every comment, every rumor, every insult, because she understood. The moment you know who you truly are, the opinions of others lose their power. Her silence was not weakness, it was wisdom. It was restraint born of a heart that had surrendered to something greater than approval. And in that silence, she taught others how to respond to criticism with calm, with elegance, with unwavering conviction. She didn't need to prove herself because her faith had already affirmed her. Every word spoken against her became an opportunity to show what real patience looks like. Every attack became a stage on which grace performed. This wasn't about ignoring pain. It wasn't about pretending the hate didn't hurt. It did, but it didn't define her. It didn't break her. Because when a person walks in truth, they know where to place their pain. They know how to rise even when the world wants to see them fall. And she rose, not with vengeance, but with vision, not with bitterness, but with boundaries. She learned to separate her worth from their worth. And people watched her and saw transformation, but the real miracle wasn't just in what she embraced, it was in how she held herself through the fire, with patience, with poise, with power. Rooted in surrender. That's what grace looks like. Not perfection, but peace in motion. And she carried that grace everywhere, from interviews to airports, from quiet prayer rooms to global stages. And so while the world threw stones, she built strength. While others questioned her, she deepened her truth. And while they tried to define her by her past, she stood firm in her present, with faith in her heart, light in her eyes, and grace in every step forward. Discovering the power of inner silence. In a world that never stops talking, where noise fills every moment, discovering the power of inner silence can feel like stumbling upon something sacred. For her, life had always been loud, on the screens, on the stages, in the headlines. The lights never dimmed, the questions never stopped, and the expectations followed her like shadows. But deep inside, there was always a whisper that the world couldn't hear, a gentle pull towards something quieter, more meaningful, more eternal. And when she embraced Islam, she finally answered that call. In the silence of her soul, she found her strength. It wasn't the speeches or the statements that transformed her. It was the stillness, the rhythm of her breath during prayer, the softness of the early morning when the world slept but her heart was wide awake. It was in those quiet moments when no one was watching that she felt most alive, most free, most seen, not by the world but by the one who created her. Inner silence is not emptiness, it is space. Space for reflection, for connection, for healing. And she learned to stop filling every moment with noise. She began to listen, not just to others, but to herself, to the voice that had been drowned out for too long. That voice, once faint, grew clearer with every act of surrender, every chapter of understanding, every prayer whispered in the language of the soul. This silence wasn't a withdrawal, it was an awakening. In it, she discovered that strength doesn't always look like speaking up. Sometimes it looks like sitting still, like being present, like choosing not to react to every opinion or defend every decision. She learned that not everything deserves her energy, not every moment needs her voice, and not every attack requires a response. Her peace became her power. The world measures power in volume, but she learned to measure it in calm. She became deeply intimate with the sacred pauses before dawn, in between movements of prayer, in the recitation of verses. There, in that space, she wasn't a celebrity, a headline, or a symbol. She was simply a servant, a seeker, a soul in dialogue with the divine. This new stillness gave her something she had never truly felt before: clarity. Clarity about who she was, why she was here, and where she was going. Her choices became more intentional, her words more meaningful, her life more aligned with purpose. And the irony was, the more silent she became within, the more impactful her presence became outwardly. Not because she was louder, but because she was real. The silence taught her to respond rather than react, to pause before rushing, to reflect before speaking. It gave her room to grow, space to feel, and a foundation to stand on. While the world continued to spin in chaos, she moved with calm certainty. She no longer needed to be heard to feel valuable. She had already been heard in prayer, in solitude, in sacred connection. That is the power of inner silence. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It simply is, and in that being, it transforms everything. It gave her peace that no applause could match, clarity that no spotlight could offer, and strength that no criticism could shake. She found her greatest power not in the noise, but in the silence between it. A rebirth in purpose. She had lived a life many only dream of: global recognition, powerful influence, and the ability to move hearts with her presence. But even at the height of it all, something inside her remained untouched. There was always a quiet ache, a question that lingered when the cameras stopped flashing. Is this all there is? The world told her she had arrived, but her soul knew she was still searching. And when she took the step others feared to take, when she embraced a faith misunderstood by many, something extraordinary happened. Not a breakdown, but a rebirth. It wasn't sudden, It wasn't dramatic. It was steady, sacred, and deeply personal. She wasn't becoming someone new. She was finally coming home to herself. In the silence of prayer, in the beauty of surrender, in the simplicity of truth, she found a new clarity, a kind of purpose that didn't depend on accolades or attention. For the first time, she wasn't chasing something. She was living something. Her life no longer revolved around image, it revolved around intention. This rebirth didn't erase her past, it redefined it. Every trial, every triumph, every headline now carried new meaning. They weren't just memories, they were stepping stones, pieces of a larger story she could now see with spiritual eyes. And in embracing that story, she no longer saw herself as a product of Hollywood or a prisoner of public opinion. She was something far more powerful, a woman guided by faith, driven by service, and grounded in divine purpose. She began to walk differently, not just physically, but spiritually. Every decision became more conscious, every word more thoughtful. She wasn't living for applause anymore. She was living for alignment. And with that shift, the world around her began to change. She attracted different conversations, different people, different energy, not because she demanded it, but because her spirit now radiated something undeniable: truth. Purpose isn't about titles. It's not about how much you have or how many people know your name. Purpose is quiet. It's consistent. It's a fire that burns long after the spotlight fades. And she found that fire deep within her soul. It wasn't loud, but it was fierce. It wasn't glamorous, but it was deeply fulfilling. It moved her to do more than be seen. It moved her to serve, to give, to inspire from a place of authenticity. This was the kind of transformation the world doesn't always understand, but she didn't need them to. She wasn't living to be understood. She was living to be aligned with truth, with God, with herself. And that alignment gave her a strength that fame never could. A strength born not from being celebrated, but from being centered. She was reborn not into a new image, but into her real identity, a woman of vision, a heart of faith, a life of meaning. Her purpose wasn't something she found outside, it was something she uncovered within. And that is the essence of rebirth. Not becoming someone else, but becoming more of who you were always meant to be. There comes a moment when the spotlight starts to feel heavy, when the applause no longer fills the silence in your heart, and when the fame that once felt like freedom starts to feel like a cage. She had everything the world told her to desire: awards, influence, beauty, status. But deep down, none of it quieted the longing. None of it answered the questions that whispered to her in the still of the night. Because fame, while powerful, cannot anchor a soul. And that's when she turned inward. That's when she began to search for something deeper, something lasting. That's when faith found her. Faith didn't arrive with fanfare. It wasn't glamorous. It was soft, steady, relentless in the way only truth can be. It didn't need a stage. It needed her heart. And when she finally gave it space, everything began to shift. She started to see through the illusion, the constant need to perform, to please, to prove. And in its place came something real, something sacred, a connection not with the world, but with the one who created it. She didn't lose herself in faith. She found herself in the quiet moments of prayer, in the structure of devotion, in the beauty of surrender. She felt whole in a way no red carpet ever made her feel. For the first time, she didn't need the world's validation because she had already been chosen by something higher. She no longer lived for the next role or headline. She lived for purpose, for presence, for peace. Fame demands that you always be on. Faith invites you to be real, to be broken, to be healing, and she welcomed that invitation with both hands. It wasn't easy. The world doesn't know what to do with someone who chooses the eternal over the temporary. People questioned her. Critics shouted. Headlines speculated. But she stood firm, not because she wanted to be defiant, but because she had finally discovered what it meant to be free. Freedom, she realized, was not being known by the world. It was being known by God. And in that knowledge, she began to walk differently, not with arrogance, but with certainty. Not to impress, but to inspire. Her strength wasn't in her fame, it was in her faith. The faith that taught her how to love without needing to be loved back, how to give without needing to be seen, how to lead without needing to be followed. People saw a change, but what they didn't see was the peace behind her smile, the calm in her steps, the depth in her silence. She had exchanged temporary praise for eternal purpose, and that exchange gave her more than any spotlight ever could. Faith over fame is not a rejection of success. It's the redirection of the soul. It's choosing meaning over noise, truth over